Constantine is the 7th limited mythic champion in the bleed calendar for DC Dark Legion, and he appears once Zatanna has about 14 days left on her banner. Today, we're breaking down whether you should draw for Constantine. You should. And we'll also talk about his kit, some of the typical synergies that you might see with him and his team, and we'll also cover some of the best game modes to use him in, which, spoiler alert, it's all of them. My overall thoughts for Constantine, he is definitely the best AoE damage dealer in the game. And I think he also sits at the top of the heap when it comes to available champions. Realistically, one of the only champions that might even come close to what Constantine is capable of in most game modes is Nightwing. Certainly, Joker has a couple of combat cycle bosses that he can put up a massive amount of damage against, but I think Constantine and Nightwing can do the most consistent damage across all of the combat cycle bosses. The initial impression that we had when we first started looking into Constantine's kit was that he would probably require full Justice League Dark synergy in order to be effective. And while he does get significantly better with the addition of the spiritual amp that you're going to get from that Justice League Dark tag, he's still an S tier addition to pretty much any team because of the AoE damage that he can put out. One thing I do typically recommend to people is that if you can get the 3 tag bonus by adding in maybe Raven as your healer, Dr. Fate to help sponge up some damage with those shields that he can provide, or throwing in a Zatanna along with Constantine to help him put out a little bit more damage. Those types of things you definitely want to consider, especially against the combat cycle. But he performs well in literally every game mode, and he's a champion that is really a must build for all players, regardless of what team you're focusing on. I think anyone who considers themselves a whale should be taking Constantine to Red 5, and all other players should be pulling for Constantine for the duration of his bleed, so for a full 30 days. The nice thing about this is that Hawkgirl is really a skip champion. You really don't need her for your roster for anything that you're building right now. I feel bad for Birds of Prey fans, but the reality is that you really want to be pulling for Constantine for as long as you can and get as many copies as you can. As with most champions, one thing we're noticing is that to get to some of the current in-game content, you really want to have all these champions at purple stars or better. I do think that Purple 1 is going to be a really nice landing spot for a Constantine if you can get him there. Even if all your other champions are white stars and blue stars, you get Constantine up into purple and you're going to be able to punch up into a lot of content that you didn't think you were capable of. Constantine's tag synergies are Justice League Dark, which is going to increase spiritual amp, which is kind of the range of spiritual damage that you're able to do. And then energy wielder, which is going to increase his HP. Looking at his kit, Constantine's ultimate is Summoned Flame. The basic mechanic is a large-scale AoE spiritual damage attack. But if Black Magic Surge is active, the next 2 ultimates will deal a significant amount of additional damage, and we'll talk about Black Magic Surge in just a minute. Exorcism Blast is Constantine's first basic skill. It's another AoE attack, dealing spiritual damage equal to a percentage of Constantine's attack. And this skill pairs really well with the ultimate because they typically go off in rapid succession, and it makes it really hard for healers to top up their team. This is one reason why Constantine is so devastating to the backline champions in PvP. If you invest in the accompanying multiversal force talent, it will reduce the cooldown of this ability, and I think that's a really good one to focus on. The next basic skill is Power Curse. So anytime Constantine casts either his ultimate or first basic skill, either of his AoE abilities, there's a fixed chance to inflict burn on the target, which will deal damage equal to 50% of Constantine's attack stat per second. And the multiversal force talent will increase Constantine's crit resistance for a short duration at the start of a battle. This is not the most important talent to build up at the start, but it will help increase Constantine's survival or survivability against Deathstroke and other enemies that can target your backline. I remember looking at Constantine's skills and abilities when he first came out and thinking, it seems that the kit is specifically tailored around trying to hard counter Deathstroke or prevent Deathstroke from being a hard counter to the Justice League Dark team. And I still think that's the case. Constantine feels very squishy, even if you have him at pretty high force levels and star levels. It almost feels like they added these talents so that they could drop down his defense a little bit. So these are definitely important for you to build up whenever you get the opportunity. I still haven't built them for mine. We'll take a look at more of the force in just a second, but I wanted to point out, kind of the purpose for these skills. All right, now let's talk about Black Magic Surge. This is Constantine's third and final basic skill. So first, at the start of the battle, his attack stat is going to increase by 10% stacking for every Justice League Dark ally. So that's going to be quite significant if you're able to field a full Justice League Dark team. Even if you just run a 3-tag synergy JLD team, you're going to get quite a lot of attack right at the beginning of the battle. Second, and more importantly, after Constantine casts his ultimate, the area of effect of his basic skill is going to increase, and the damage of his next ultimate is also going to increase. So we talked about Summon Flame earlier, and I mentioned that if Black Magic Surge is active when you cast your ultimate, the next 2 ultimates are going to deal a significant amount of additional damage. Effectively, from what I've seen of the kit, once you get started and you've fired off a couple of ultimates with Constantine, until he dies or until the battle's over with, he's pretty much going to do an amplified ultimate every time. Now, the multiversal force talent for this ability will increase Constantine's physical defense for a short time after the start of each battle. Again, this is not a required talent by any stretch, but it is going to give you some protection against Deathstroke, potentially your Nightwings that are out there, and others who can target that back line. And as with Power Curse, this force talent is only going to last for the first few seconds of the battle. So, again, it just has to be a hard counter to Deathstroke trying to kill Constantine, because it's going to go away after the beginning of the battle, and then you're not going to have, there's not going to be really any effect to this force talent afterwards. Well, let's take a look at Constantine's force. The recommended approach for Constantine is going to be a little bit different than what I've been talking about for other bleed champions. Typically, I'd tell you to focus on the multiversal force talents associated with the basic skills first. I actually think here you want to focus on reducing the cooldown of Exorcism Blast first, so definitely focus on that one. And then you're going to get the first level of the other 2 basic skill talents. After you've gotten the first level of those 2 basic skills, the Deathstroke counter skills really, you'll focus on 4 of the lesser talents before circling back. First, we've got Spiritual Amp Boost, then Spiritual Pin Boost. Both of those are very important to focus on first. We also have an attack percent boost, and we've got an HP percent boost. So those 4 are going to be quite important for you to build up as quickly as you can before circling back to some of the other options you have available. As far as gear goes, Constantine needs as much spiritual amp and spiritual penetration as possible, so I'd focus there first when you're doing your transmutes, but you're pretty safe to lock in attack, HP, min, crit resistance, and physical resistance as well. I think his biggest weakness is how quickly he can die if someone gets to him with a high damage ult, so a little defense is really going to help you here. All right, let's talk about legacies for a moment. Sigil Magic is Constantine's unique legacy piece. When you equip it, it immediately is going to provide you increased attack, increased spiritual amp, and increased spiritual penetration. Synchronicity is the real game changer with this legacy piece. So basically, anytime you cast either of Constantine's AoE abilities, the ultimate or the first basic skill, this is going to trigger a third AoE. Well, I guess I should say second AoE, but effectively you'll be doing 3 different AoEs with Constantine. And if you cast the ultimate, you're probably going to immediately cast the basic skill. And so then you're going to be doing just a bunch of AoEs in rapid succession. And the second basic skill, Mystic Strike, will also permanently increase Constantine's attack the first 3 times he uses his ultimate. So really just kind of building on everything. You have this in conjunction with the Black Magic Surge. All these things are just kind of building together to give your Constantine a massive amount of attack. So as the battle goes on, it's very similar to this, Superman's ultimate mechanic where as you continue to use the ultimate, you're just going to get more and more damage. So this is really one of the top 3 best legacy pieces in the game. And if you're building Constantine, it goes without saying that you should be immediately buying this legacy piece, assuming you can afford it. There are a few lesser or lower level legacy pieces that will help you get by while you're saving up for sigil magic. The first one is going to be Dart with Poison Ivy Poison. You can see I have it on my Sinestro right now. This one's going to be giving you additional attack, energy gain bonus, and spiritual penetration. And then casting your ultimate will also have a chance to increase damage received by the enemy for a short duration. And a good second option here for the mythic legacy pieces is going to be the Imp Doll. Imp Doll will increase attack and energy gain bonus as well as spiritual amp. And casting your ultimate will have a chance of reducing enemy healing received for a short duration. One last decent option, especially for someone who just has a really new account, is going to be the Plastic Explosive. So Plastic Explosive will increase your attack and spiritual amp. If you don't have access to the unique legacy or any of the mythic legacies that I just mentioned, this will be a good starter for you. And if you really have no other options, you can use the Replica Time Commander, but hopefully by the time you have Constantine, you'll have plenty of better options for legacy pieces. For notable synergies, Constantine does perform the best with a full Justice League Dark team. However, I think there are some other champions worth mentioning that have great plug-and-play synergy with Constantine. Zatanna is going to be an obvious choice to amplify Constantine's spiritual damage. But if we go over and take a look at Legion of Doom, you'll be surprised to know that Scarecrow's ultimate can inflict an ability called Mental Breakdown, which will reduce enemy men, and that makes spiritual damage more effective against those enemies. Similarly, Sinestro's basic skill, Bondage of Fear, has a chance each time Sinestro attacks to reduce the target's spiritual defense. I use these 2 champions quite regularly with Constantine in PvP, as well as several of the combat cycle bosses. And to a lesser extent, non-spenders can pair Two-Face with Constantine because he can inflict the panic debuff, which is going to reduce enemy spiritual defense. All right, let's talk about combat cycle and PvP viability. Constantine is top tier at every day of combat cycle. He's going to perform the best against enemies like Murder Machine and Merciless due to the additional targets to hit. But significant testing shows he's also very powerful against even the single target enemies, and I see him as being meta for combat cycle for months to come. He is also incredibly good in PvP, especially if you have his unique legacy and purple stars. Deathstroke is a weakness, but in most cases, all you'll need in Meta Brawl in 3v3 matches is one ultimate to go off for the match to be essentially over. That's going to wrap up my deep dive Whaler Skip video on Constantine. We've talked a little bit about PvP and the usefulness of Constantine in Meta Brawl and 3v3. And I actually had a few discussions with some folks on the official Discord recently where they were asking to see comps to kind of show or document Constantine versus Deathstroke. I've got a video that's going to be closely following this one where we'll go through a few different battles. I think there's 6 or 7 of them with my Constantine team. And note that I'm typically using a 3-tag synergy, not the full Justice League Dark synergy. You'll see what I mean in the video, but we'll go through some of those videos and you can kind of get a raw idea of how this team is going to perform for you. But I really hope that you've enjoyed this video on Constantine. He's one of my favorite characters in the game right now, and you will not be disappointed if you pull for him. If you enjoyed this content and you want to see more videos like this on DC Dark Legion, please consider subscribing, and I will see you on the next video.